She worked hard for her home, proud of the grass she cared for, a symbol of peace in a world that often denied her that dignity. But to one neighbor, rules didn't matter, and respect certainly didn't. Every morning, her lawn was scarred by tire tracks, as if her space, her effort, her very identity could be trampled without consequence. She didn't fight at first. She hoped it would stop. But when it didn't, she decided to make a stand. What she did next, no one saw coming. Marcus took pride in his home. After years of saving, long nights working double shifts, and pushing past every subtle reminder that people like him weren't always welcome in certain neighborhoods, he'd finally carved out a place that was his. The small brick house sat at the corner of a quiet cul-de-sac, an address that meant stability, progress, and hope. For him, the front lawn wasn't just grass. It was a canvas of hard work and dignity. Every Saturday morning, Marcus could be found out front, trimming edges, watering soil, pulling weeds. Neighbors passed by with quick nods, rarely stopping to talk. Some smiled politely. Others pretended not to see him at all. He noticed, but he didn't dwell. It wasn't until the rumble of tires across that neatly kept yard that Marcus realized just how fragile peace could be here. At first, he thought it was a mistake, a wrong turn, maybe a delivery driver passing through. But when the tracks kept appearing week after week, one neighbor's towering sense of entitlement revealed itself with painful clarity. For Marcus, this wasn't just about grass being torn up. It was about boundaries being ripped away. And as the damage spread, so did the weight of something darker, a reminder that no matter how much he had achieved, there were still those determined to remind him of his place. At first, Marcus wanted to believe it was innocent. One morning, fresh tire marks cut across his lawn, gouging the soft soil he'd watered just the evening before. He sighed, shook his head, and went about repairing it. But the next week, more tracks appeared. Then again, and again, each time deeper, more careless, almost deliberate. It wasn't long before Marcus saw the culprit. Her name was Denise, though most neighbors called her the Karen from the HOA. She acted like she owned more than her home, like the whole street belonged to her. Everyone else avoided confrontation, but Marcus's lawn had become her shortcut. Even when empty pavement stretched just feet away, Denise chose to drive across his yard, wheels rolling over what he'd built with patience and care. When Marcus approached her one afternoon, politely asking her to stop, she laughed. With a cursory wave of her hand, she told him, "It's just grass." Then, as if the conversation didn't matter, she spun her SUV's tires and drove off, over his lawn again. To her, it was nothing. To Marcus, it was everything, a message masked as inconvenience. In neighborhoods like this, where stares lasted too long and comments often carried hidden blades, just grass wasn't what was at stake. It was respect. It was belonging. The following weeks became a twisted routine. The whine of Denise's engine, the crunch of tires, the scars left behind. He began waking earlier, looking out his window for her headlights, heart sinking as they crept closer. Sometimes she slowed down when she saw him watching, smirking as her wheels tore into the soil. Other times, she glanced away as if he didn't even exist. Neighbors saw. They whispered. But no one spoke up. When Marcus brought it to the HOA board, their silence was louder than any denial. One member told him to let it go, it's not worth making a fuss. Another suggested maybe he was overreacting. They framed her disrespect as a misunderstanding, his frustration as sensitivity. The injustice burned. Not only was his lawn being destroyed, but the system around him was signaling once again that his boundaries could be dismissed. And he knew, if the roles were reversed, if he drove across her yard, there'd be letters, fines, maybe even police involvement within days. What Marcus faced now wasn't just entitlement from one neighbor. It was the quiet reinforcement of a hierarchy that said her disruption was tolerable, while his voice was not. Nights blurred into restless silence, his mind churning with images of tire tracks crossing not only his lawn, but his dignity. He tried reason. He tried patience. All were met with disdain and laughter. Every shred of calm he poured into the situation was mocked by the hum of her engine, and so the tension inside him shifted. If no one else would stand for him, then he would stand for himself. But how? He couldn't call for help. He couldn't rely on fairness. That left only one choice. He would remind Denise and everyone watching that boundaries once trampled can fight back. What he planned next wasn't just about grass. It was about justice. Marcus had reached his breaking point. Weeks of humiliation, laughter, and silence from the very association meant to protect homeowners had sharpened his resolve into something unshakable. If Denise was going to treat his lawn like a highway, she would finally feel the cost of crossing a boundary she had chosen to ignore. Late one evening, under the hush of a quiet cul-de-sac, Marcus knelt in his yard. His hands pushed spikes just beneath the surface, hidden fangs buried in the soil he once only nurtured with care. Each one gleamed faintly in the streetlight as he worked, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and resolve. To an outsider, it was metal. To Marcus, it was justice. The following morning, the familiar roar of Denise's SUV split the silence. Marcus stood inside, tension knotted in his chest, every instinct screaming. He watched as the tires rolled closer, closer, until her wheels cut across the lawn like a signature of defiance. And then it happened. A sickening crack echoed through the still air. Her SUV jerked violently as the tires met the buried steel. Rubber hissed, shredding under the weight. The car rocked forward, lurching to a halt. For the first time, she wasn't smug, wasn't laughing. She was stunned, angry, yes, but shaken, forced into stillness by the very ground she had disrespected for so long. Inside, Marcus's pulse raced. His yard, his sanctuary, had finally pushed back. But even in that moment of triumph, he knew the stakes were far greater than tires or scratches. Denise's fury wasn't done. And in a neighborhood where lines of power were already drawn, revenge against someone like Marcus never ended on level ground. The trap had worked. But what would come next could shatter everything. As Denise stormed out of her disabled SUV, her fury filled the street. She yelled, threatened, even called the HOA. Yet when the committee gathered, their outrage wasn't aimed at her reckless disregard, but at Marcus. They grilled him for creating a hazard, twisting the story until he became the problem. An act of self-protection was suddenly painted as aggression. Marcus sat in that room, listening to voices that pretended neutrality, but carried centuries of bias. He had followed every rule, tended his home with pride, asked politely for respect. Yet in their eyes, Denise's entitlement was excusing, while his defense was suspect. The lawn eventually healed. Grass grew back over the torn earth, and the spikes were removed. But the wound inside Marcus did not fade. He realized this wasn't just about a neighbor or a yard. It was about the deeper truth he couldn't escape. No matter how hard he worked, how carefully he lived, there would always be people eager to remind him of invisible lines he wasn't supposed to cross. Still, Marcus refused to shrink. He carried his head higher, not because the fight was fair, but because dignity demanded it. And though Denise's tires had left scars in his lawn, it was her actions and the HOA's silence that carved a far deeper scar into the neighborhood's conscience. This story is more than Marcus's. It's a glimpse into what so many face, a daily erosion of respect, masked as misunderstanding, dismissed as not serious. Yet every dismissal adds up. Every silence feeds the cycle. So the question remains, when boundaries are trampled and justice is ignored, how many more people will have to fight alone before we finally demand change together?